God. We thank you for this blessed morning. We thank you so much for our fellowship and the study that we had already earlier, and the blessing that that was. We ask now that you would help us to understand this study that I will present. Please help me to explain things clearly and for people to understand and be able to ask questions too. And as we look at Europe and the significance of the events that have gone on there and are continuing to play out, may you help us to understand the times in which we're living now and what's to come. In Jesus' name, amen. Good morning, everybody. Happy Sabbath, and it's good to meet with you all. So I'm going to be talking about World War III and the European Union today. So hopefully this will be an informative study, as it was for me as I reviewed it. So I will be open to any kind of interruptions if you have questions, and I have the chat window open as well. So I should be able to see any comments in the chat, hopefully. If I miss any, please call them out. So that's my topic for today. On the board, I've already written up some of the lines to save some time, I guess. And what I've got here is the dates of our lifetime. This is more or less the line of the priests, and I've got World War I and World War II. So the reason I have World War I and World War II up there is because I'll be focusing on war in the Western Front today, but I've also included war on the Eastern Front and where we have them marked already. So I thought I might open it up in case people might like to help us identify these dates. I've put the years there, but I thought perhaps we could put some names or events to those dates as well so that we could maybe get a bit of a context of what was happening at the time. So just opening it up for anybody to unmute and let me know. Do we know what happened in 1914, what that event was?
World War I.
Yes, World War I. Yep. Do you know what triggered that?
Assassination.
Franz Ferdinand being assassinated.
Yeah, that's right. And then we have the invasion of Serbia by Austria-Hungary, which is like the beginning of the war. And all right, so that's good. That's when we mark the beginning of World War I, and it's a two-front war straight up. So that's where we've got the Western Front and the Eastern Front there. Now let's go to March 1918. Do we know what that event was? Okay, so it's the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, where Russia withdraws out of World War I. So that's where we mark in March 1918, quite close to the end. And then November 1918.
End of World War I.
Yes, kind of is, kind of isn't, because it's kind of like we have an event in 1918. There's also another event for 1919. So do you know either of those, Brendan? What we name them?
I've got a feeling it's
No.
the Treaty of... No?
Yeah, that's good. That's the 1919.
Oh, I got it wrong then. Okay.
No, it's actually all relevant. So we do have that, and we mark that as Sunday law. So that's the treaty, and we'll talk about this later, so it is relevant. Treaty of Versailles. That's the official end of World War I, but actually the fighting stopped back here. I wonder if anybody know the name? Otherwise, I'll just pop it up there.
The signing of the
German.
armistice on November 11.
Yeah, that's right. So we call that Armistice Day, the signing of the armistice. Yeah, Armistice Day. So that's basically they stop fighting here, and then there's this. Several months go by. It takes us into 1919, and the Treaty of Versailles is signed, and that's where it's really officially ended, and that's when Germany realizes all that they have lost, the significance of that defeat. So we have this transition period here. So we kind of put the war on the Western Front ending here, but we see this sort of period of time, extra time here, which we'll discuss later in the study. So that was good. Thank you, everybody, for those bits of information and input. Okay, so let's look now at World War II. What happens in 1939?
Economic collapse.
I couldn't hear that very well, sorry.
Beginning of World War II.
Beginning of World War II, wonderful. So yes, it is. It's the beginning of the World War II. We've got the Western Front. Do you know what event we mark there as starting that? Otherwise, I can put it there. Somebody invades somebody.
Invasion of Poland.
Invasion
Correct.
of Poland.
Thank you. Yes. So I'll just put invasion. Okay. So yeah, that's the beginning of World War II. Now here we just have a one-front war for the beginning, and then it becomes a two-front war in 1941. Does anybody know what that event was? This is like
Operation Barbarossa.
Yes, yes, thank you. Barbarossa, very good. So that's where now we now have a two-front war because the enemies, they're now enemies of Germany and Russia. Okay, and 1945, I put the Allies defeat Germany. It's the end of World War II. So Germany. Now, since we've brought up this little section here, I'll do this here as well. We do add on this extra bit in terms of some ongoing process that happens beyond this time. We give this period a name, and it ends in 1989. So we line up 1919 and 1989 here with Sunday law. This here is the Cold War. Okay. So there's still some work and activities happening here that end in 1989. So that's a bit of a revision of that. Okay, so when we're looking at application now, so we can start with the Eastern Front. When we're talking about war today in our dispensation, what does war look like when we're talking about war between the King of the North and the King of the South, or in this case, it's the Eastern Front? We talk about information warfare. We also talk about something else in that context, what war looks like today.
Proxy.
Spheres of influence.
Yes, spheres of influence. Yeah, I didn't hear what the other person said, sorry. But yes, spheres of influence is what I was talking about. So we have spheres of influence being fought over since we're marking the beginning of that in 2003, going through to 2019, but it doesn't end there because we now can see it appearing on this line here. So spheres of influence between Russia and United States occurring all the way from 2003 and coming to an end here in 2021, or at least a change some kind of a change and we enter this extra period here. When Austria-Hungary invaded Serbia, that was a sphere of influence of Russia at the time. And here we can see that Iraq was a sphere of influence as well. And so we have a series of nations that are fought over here. I can put some names up. So we have Iraq. I think during that time period, we also mark things like Syria, because this is before 2019, Syria, Venezuela, and probably others as well. What else did I have there? Crimea, of course, in 2014. There was a bunch of spheres of influence being fought over between 2003 and 2019. And in 2019 to 2021, we also see that this was continuing. And in 2021, we see there was like a deadly wound given to the King of the South. In this case, we're calling it Eastern Front. So yeah, small spheres of influence were continuing here. I'll just put spheres of influence and information war. All right, so that's the Eastern Front. Now the Western Front, when we're talking about this one here down in World War II, this lines up with 2016. So does anybody know what happened in 2016 that we would mark for the beginning of war on the Western Front?
Was
Election?
Yeah,
I heard
the
election.
Cambridge
Interference,
Analytica.
yes. Yes, and there was another person who spoke, I missed.
Oh, I was just going to say Donald Trump. Excuse me.
Donald Trump.
Donald Trump got in. Yeah.
Very good. Yeah. So we mark the election of Donald Trump here. Okay. So for United States to bring in a Sunday law, they need to overthrow basically themselves, the establishment, or that power that has to be overthrown in order to have a Sunday law. So there is a war, as it basically internally going on here that we mark from 2016 to 2021. There are other events also that happened in 2016, and we'll get to those as well. But what about 2003, when we're talking about war on the Western Front? Does anybody know what happened, what we would apply that to?
That would be Putin against the West.
So yes, we have that with the Eastern Front. So that's where we would say Russia is Eastern Front. But now we're talking about the West, so the Western world. There's some kind of a fight between a dictatorial United States or a version of the United States against the West. So
Could it be the Iraq War?
yes, we do mark the Iraq War, and we mark that in relation to the East, but we do also mark that in relation to the West as well. So how can the Iraq War be connected to war on the Western Front? If people don't know, that's okay, because that's what we're going to study today.
I thought
Just
didn't the United States had a fallout with the Pope?
with the Pope. Okay, I don't know about that, but that's not what I was thinking. I'm not sure what happened did something happen in 2003 with the Pope? That's like not part of this study, but do you know of something? It was, I guess, over the war. I suppose the Pope was against the war. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
okay.
Because the United Nations, they didn't go together with the United Nations, their decision. So America decided to go against all that. And
yeah, okay. Yeah, I see where you're coming from. Okay, yeah, interesting thought to add as well. Yep. Okay, well, we'll be talking about the European Union and NATO and all of that, and how 2003 is a significant event in terms of the relationship between the United States and the European Union, and how a war actually begins, not just internally within the United States, which we're seeing here in 2016, but actually against the West more broadly. And this war kicking off in 2003, where there's quite a breakdown in the relationship between the European nations and the United States. So we'll look at some of the history of NATO, how and why that was built, some reasons why it was built, and some reasons why it was held onto past the fall of the Soviet Union. We're going to look at how the European Union came about, what were some of the reasons for that, and how that breakdown then occurred in 2003, and how then we see this war between the United States and European Union happening throughout this period, coming through to 2021, where we see at the ending of that, but then we know we're living in this time period here, and we still see there is still problems between the United States and European Union and NATO as well. So that's my introduction, a little bit of revision of the lines, because what's happening today with Europe and the United States is prophetic. And so when we read the news and see what's going on, we can see this is actually the breaking down of this relationship. The weakening of the European Union is a necessary step for that domination that we're expecting to happen worldwide. So, okay. Did anybody have any questions yet? Okay. So we've got a timeline here, and what we're going to do, I'm going to draw NATO events up here, and we're going to draw European Union events down here, and then discuss all of that. When we talk about the West, what do people think the West means as well? Like, because I spoke about how we think of the United States as internal war, as a war on the Western Front, but when we speak of the West, we know that it also includes Western Europe. It includes countries like Australia, New Zealand, some surrounding nations here. There are disputed areas where people say it should be called the West, and other people say no. Eastern Europe is sometimes considered part of the West, sometimes not. But we know that North America and Western Europe, and then some other countries around the world, are considered the West. So that's why we're applying that war on the Western Front to an area that's bigger than the United States. So that's that. Okay, so 1945, we saw that just on the board before. Maybe I'll turn this a little bit. I'm standing over here. 1945, the end of World War II and the creation of the UN. So I'll just put UN here because we're not really doing the line of the UN, but we need to know it is there. That's the end of World War II. And that's where we see we're going to take our history from moving forward, especially as we're looking at NATO. So do we know the reason why NATO was built, the purpose of that?
To restrain the Soviet Union?
Yes, to restrain the Soviet Union. And we had 12 founding members here. So actually I've got my printed thing here, I'll hold it. So just to see how it grew, we had Belgium, Canada, Denmark, France, Iceland, Italy, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Norway, Portugal, United Kingdom, and USA. Okay, so they're a group of friends, and they're going to support each other to help resist the USSR, still USSR back then. Okay, in 1952, two more countries were added, and that was Greece and Turkey. And 1955, we had West Germany added. West Germany. And in 1982, we had Spain. Okay, so during this period, we still have the USSR. And so the NATO is supposed to be restraining the USSR. And so that all makes sense until you get to 1989, 1991, where the USSR is taken down, and that's the end of the Cold War. But did NATO disband or, call it a day and walk away at that point? No, they didn't. What actually happened is that the East and West Germany united, and the NATO had promised not to expand eastward any further, and Gorbachev had warned them not to do so. So so that was the promise, but they didn't actually disband NATO. They held on to it. That stayed more or less the same. No other countries were added, and they didn't expand eastward until we get to 1999. 1999, there was a certain Russian leader that was just coming into power at that point. Who was that?
Putin.
Putin is coming on the scene. Putin, would he like the idea of NATO expanding eastward?
No.
No, he doesn't like that. It makes him feel threatened, and it made him very angry because he sees this as a broken promise as well. But so these three countries that were added were Czech, Hungary, and Poland. So we see that this is quite threatening to Putin and Russia when NATO is expanding, and especially after the Cold War has ended as well. The relationships are not, I guess, going that well. Now, 2003, so I copied into this one the Western Front here, because we're going to leave Eastern Front aside now and just focus on the Western Front. That top line is the World War I application, then we had the World War II application, and that little extension bit here where we still see some things basically getting wrapped up, tidied up, put a bow around it around here, and I put a dot for this is where we are today. Well, now we get to 2003, and as we mentioned, that was the Iraq War. When the Iraq War happened, what was France and Germany's position on the Iraq War?
Didn't agree.
They didn't agree. So you've got some NATO members, Germany and France. There's, so we say, disunity within NATO. There's disagreement within NATO. Article 5 of the NATO treaty says that if you attack one of those countries, one of us, you attack any one of us, we're all going to fight back together and protect that state until the threat is eliminated. So the argument is whether or not Iraq is the threat. Some are saying if Iraq is the threat, then by law, by the rules, all the nations must band together and fight this threat. But if Iraq is not the threat, then you don't need to hold to Article 5 because it doesn't apply. There is not a threat that needs to be attacked. So there's arguments going on within NATO. I should write up here that this is NATO as well. I'll just put it up here. So this part of the board is NATO. Okay, so 2003, there's a fight. I'll just put internal disagreement. Over the war in Iraq. So what can you do if you need to get votes and you're the United States, you want to go to war in Iraq, there's disagreement within NATO, you want to add more power to your side of the argument, what could you actually do? What would, for example, today in the Supreme Court, when there's been some arguments about that, they've got their lifetime position, and we can't take any Supreme Court judges out, but we could potentially add more seats to the Supreme Court and then put more left-wing people in there, for example, something like that. And we could actually change the voting balance around by adding more people, if that makes sense. In the same way with NATO, if you find some countries that would vote your way and they'd really like to be part of NATO, and you kind of go, okay, if you are pro-war in Iraq, I might let you join NATO. So this is kind of the situation. It was like a quid pro quo situation where you could join our coalition of the willing and come and vote in support of the Iraq war and come and join NATO. So we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I think it's 7 countries join in 2004. This is Bulgaria, Estonia. These are more Eastern, Latvia, and Lithuania, Romania, Slovakia, and Slovenia. 7 more countries are added in 2004. So NATO is expanding more. And what happens is they are in support of the Iraq war, or for the most part they are, all except one of them end up sending troops to Iraq. But just before they did so, they got rid of their national draft. So there wasn't any forced drafting of their people into the army for the war in Iraq, because I guess there would have been, like a huge backlash or riots or something if they had have done so. So they got rid of the draft, but they did actually send troops to Iraq in support of the Iraq war. So that's their history up until 2004. So the question, I guess, now is to consider why. So it was 1989 to 1991. Why wasn't it disbanded? Does anybody know? Or have thoughts about why this situation would continue?
King of the South was dissolved in 1991.
Yeah, so if the status purpose is to restrain the USSR, and then there is no more USSR, and actually I think that the belief was that things were going to get a lot better. Russia was opening up. There was hopes for a democracy in Russia as well. So the threat that NATO existed to restrain was more or less ended here, or perceived to be ended, but NATO continued to exist. So was this the only purpose of NATO is the question, because maybe there was another reason that NATO existed, which is why maybe only one of the reasons is the USSR, and there are other reasons for NATO. Does anybody have any ideas of what that might be? There's actually, there's an author called David Skidmore, and the book was Paradoxes of Power, US Foreign Policy in a Changing World, is the resource where all the Tessa got some of the material from. And that author, David Skidmore, gave 3 reasons for NATO. So we had the one about the USSR, restrain. That was reason 1. And then there was 2 others.
Would it be
Anybody
a
want to
safeguard?
guess?
Sorry, Catherine.
Safeguard.
Would it be a safeguard against autocratic governments?
Kind of, yes. I think one of the reasons you could put in that category. So, Marie, when they set up NATO, just thinking about their mindset in 1945, 1949, when they actually set NATO up, there was a feeling of being threatened by a country, but it wasn't the USSR, it was another country at the end of 2 world wars. And there was a concern that that certain country might need
It'll be
restraint.
Germany?
So Germany, great.
Germany.
So keep Germany down. Keep Germany restrained. Good. Okay, anybody else for another 3rd reason?
The US want to be on the top.
You got it. That's it. The US wanted to have some control as well. So once we get to here and we have the end of the Soviet Union, the situation is that we have a bunch of countries. The US is here. It's pretty powerful. I'll just color it in a little bit. It's here with all the other countries, and they're all friends, and they have this rule, you know, all for one, one for all. And America's on the inside, so it's able to influence and have some power over these other countries, as long as it remains in NATO, or as long as NATO remains a thing. Kind of looks like a meteor or something. But that's my diagram of the different countries. So they're on the inside, they're an insider. So if it's like a club, say you had a group of friends or something, and one of them is quite, I don't know, a controlling or a bullying kind, but as long as they stay in the friendship group, they can still maintain control over the others in the group. So that's kind of the other reason that that author, David Skidmore, has given. So the quote from that book is, there was two quotes. One is that NATO was created to keep Russia out, Germany down, and Americans in. So I'll put, well, hopefully that's clear enough. US, I'll just keep, they're part of the in crowd, they're in there. And the other one was the problem of American hegemony in Europe has been a major issue since the end of the 1800s. So this has been an issue about American hegemony. Now, the word hegemony means to dominate or to control or to have power over. I've got a couple of quotes about it here somewhere, I think. It's okay from the American Heritage Dictionary. Yeah, maybe I'll put hegemony there. I'll just make a bit of space. I'll change that to keep Germany down. And hegemony. Sorry, it's not all in one row. But just in case we keep the board photo later. So yeah, hegemony is the headship or control exercised by one state over another or others, or the position of being the strongest and most powerful, and therefore able to control others. So it's this kind of an idea of like the biggest in the group and having control. I'll go back to where I was up to. So those were the three purposes of NATO. There wasn't just the one, which explains why it continues to exist today. Okay, so that's the end
Katherine,
of that.
no,
Yep.
sorry.
No.
I've got another little thought about 1991. So it's, you know, I don't know how important it is, but at the end, I guess 1991 why does the world still need NATO? I guess 1991, this is just, if we go back to the context, that was the beginning of the Serb-Croat war about Yugoslavia, and NATO had quite a bit of involvement in dealing with Slobodan Milosevic. That was a long time ago, but that went for, so basically 1991, I think it went through to the mid-90s, like 95 or something. So that straight away, even though the Soviet Union sort of was dealt with, there was pretty well straight away, there was sort of significant conflict again that NATO was involved in to deal with issues as well. Pretty well straight off the back of 91.
Do you think then that this sort of like, there's still some sort of kind of events happening here until it's kind of, but really once they've dealt with some of those breakaway Soviet states, you know, that as the Soviet Union is coming apart, there's things that are happening. Maybe if it would dissolve, maybe it would be more like 1995 or something like that. Is that kind of what you're saying?
So still dealing with, I guess, fallout of, I guess, autocrats. Someone already mentioned that. Or, you know, there's ethnic cleansing, like it was just, I vaguely remember bits and pieces of it, but it was pretty awful at the time. I know NATO was involved with airstrike. I know they were dealing with issues,
So
but
we're still
you're right.
working for a bit there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
okay.
sort of messy. It's like it's complicated, isn't it? It's like it's complicated history.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But I agree with your 3 points. I agree. I just
Okay. Yeah. There. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it is. Say, for example, that quote about keeping Germany down and America in and whatever was apparently a well-known phrase. So it must have been a perspective of some people. I don't know, apart from the author of that book. So there was, I guess, more elements to NATO than just controlling USSR. There was also the aspect of Germany itself. When back here, it was probably more a worry, and then Americans wanting to maintain a level of control in Europe as well. So, okay, any other comments or questions?
Yeah, I was
I think-
going to, sorry.
You go, Josephine.
I was going to say, when you asked the question, that to keep America in is more for security of those little nations in Europe, because if they disband in it, then they don't have the powerful America around them, especially when the World War has just ended and America came, to the rescue of the vulnerable ones.
So you sound making it sound nice, like protective parent. They kind of want to stay in NATO to look after the little chicks. Is that kind of the thinking that you mean?
Yeah.
Okay, well, it sounds very kind and altruistic of them if you put it that way. Whereas the other perspective is that they don't want the European nations to get too powerful and become a threat. So it was more of a selfish motive, the way this author had put it. Yeah. Could have been both, a mixture of both, I don't know. And somebody else, was it Ray?
I was just
No.
thinking these 3 reasons really tell you a lot about the US's insecurities. Like, even though they've just, won the Second World War and the Cold War, they're still feeling really deeply insecure.
Yeah. And so let's look at maybe some of the reasons why, because there's some things that start happening here in 1963 that might make America feel insecure. So I might move on then. If I'll just give another chance if anybody else had a question or anything yet, and then if not, we'll move on. Speak now if you're going to. Okay. So let's go to 1963. Now I'm going to be talking about, on this side of the board, I'm going to be talking about basically the European Union, but I'm going to incorporate this different treaty that was between France and Germany, but we'll put European Union here. So before we get into the dates for the European Union itself, I wanted to talk about 1963. So in 1963, we had Charles de Gaulle of France, and I understand that he was a nationalistic leader, but he also felt that he wanted to protect France from American dominance in Europe. So he was quite concerned about his own country, and to protect his own country, he wanted to do a couple of things. One was to unite with West Germany and other countries as well in Europe, which excluded the United States, and also to get nuclear weapons for his own country. So he wanted France to have nuclear weapons. So what we had here in 1963 is the Elysee Treaty. I think it's double E. Yep. And I think there's some accents there. Oh, I've done that one wrong. Okay, treaty. And this was France and West Germany. Okay, so with regard to nuclear weapons, so I hadn't, maybe other people knew this already, but I didn't kind of really think about France having nuclear weapons, so I looked it up. And Wikipedia has a page on France and weapons of mass destruction, and the quote from that was, France is the only member of the European Union to possess independent, non-NATO nuclear weapons, as in it doesn't belong to NATO, it's their own, for their own country. The French military is currently thought to retain a weapons stockpile of around 300 operational deployed nuclear warheads, making it the third largest in the world, speaking in terms of warheads, not megatons. The weapons are part of the national force de frappe, or force of dissuasion, developed in the late 1950s and 1960s to give France the ability to, it says, quote, distance itself from NATO while having a means of nuclear deterrence under sovereign control. So you can see here that what this idea is we're going to have some European countries uniting. We're starting off with these two, but we're going to leave the United States out over here. So now they're outside, they're not an insider. This is possibly and probably a threat or feeling threatening to the United States as well. Now, this treaty was on the 22nd of January 1963. I'll just pop the date there because the date comes up again. What was that? Was 22nd. 22nd of Jan. Okay, but when they went to make this treaty, they were pressured, and the pressure was great enough that they had to insert a clause into the treaty, and the treaty had this clause that said, so French and West German treaties to the United States and NATO would take supremacy over this treaty. So these ones trump this one when it comes down to any kind of disagreement. So they had to insert that clause because they were pressured. So right, we'll go to 40 years later to the day. What's 40 years later to the day? It's here. So just put it like that. 40 years to here. And we're looking at the same date, 22nd of Jan. Okay, so let's move back into this world of 2003. The war in Iraq, Germany and France are opposing it. There's pressure, there's sort of playing around with votes within NATO to try to get this across the line. All of that context, there's what we call not good relations between France and Germany and the United States. So comes to the 22nd of January, what is France and Germany going to be doing that day? Well, they're going to have a celebration, aren't they? It's their 40-year anniversary. So they're having their celebration and celebrating their unity that's lasted 40 years. And right now we're together, we're strong as ever because of this unity that we have. We stand together, we're really strong because we have power, in unity together. So they're celebrating this, but on that day, there was a comment made by Donald Rumsfeld in the United States when he was, he must have been interviewed or speaking to the media. And I will read a little bit of the article. The title of the article is Outrage at Old Europe Remarks. So, French and German leaders have reacted angrily to comments by the US Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld describing the two countries as problems in the crisis over Iraq. Mr. Rumsfeld made his remarks in response to a pledge on Wednesday by French President Jacques Chirac and German Chancellor Gerhard Schröder to work together to oppose war in Iraq. Quoting, Germany has been a problem and France has been a problem, Mr. Rumsfeld told Washington's Foreign Press Corps on Wednesday. But you look at vast numbers of other countries in Europe, they're not with France and Germany, they're with the US. You're thinking of Europe as Germany and France. I don't, he said. I think that's old Europe. On Thursday, the French and German leaders reiterated their opposition to the war as they continued celebrating the 40th anniversary of the Élysée Treaty between their two countries. So there's insults flying around and offence. So it's obviously broken out into open warfare, if you want to put it that way, open disagreement. The quote that was given in that book that I mentioned earlier was that this event was referred to as the transatlantic earthquake. It was very big. A quote as well, another one from the Paradoxes of Power book is, the Iraq War has produced a very different kind of division. The damage between Washington and Europe by George Bush's actions is likely to prove real, lasting, and irreparable. When future historians ask when American hegemony ended, they may point to January 22, 2003. It was the 40th anniversary of a treaty between France and Germany. So France and Germany unite, push back against American hegemony. The United States wasn't happy. They're told that France and Germany, you're no longer able to decide the course anymore. And so this is where we're marking in this year the beginning of war on the Western Front in relation to 2003. So at the very beginning, I asked, what do you think might have happened in 2003? That was a war in the Western Front, and correctly, people identified Iraq War. Then when I said, what's the connection between Iraq War and war on the Western Front, though? So put Russia aside, but the West. This is the answer to that. It's the breaking it down of the relations, and now a warfare between. It's a warfare against Europe, if you want to put it that way, Western Europe in particular, because there were some of these Eastern European nations were doing what the United States wanted, which is why Donald Rumsfeld insults the Western Europe and likes Eastern Europe. Any questions or comments? Okay, so those countries, again, we had Bulgaria, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, Slovakia, Slovenia. They were brought in here and they voted for the Iraq War. So that was one of the benefits of having them on board. There was another reason, is that those countries expressed that they favoured NATO to be the cornerstone of European security. They did not want the European Union to be the cornerstone of European security. So they preferred this model rather than this model for Europe. So that was another benefit. So when Rumsfeld says, I think I've got another quote. Yeah, I do. It's from that same article that Mr. Rumsfeld expanded on his remark about old Europe by pointing to the planned eastward expansion of NATO as far as the 3 Baltic republics. He said, if you look at the entire NATO Europe today, the centre of gravity is shifting to the east, he said. So that's sort of relating to this issue of adding some more of these Eastern countries in here. So, okay. I will now, let's walk us through the European Union itself. So we'll go back down to here. We have 1951 is where we mark it here as it's the Treaty of Paris. The Treaty of Paris is that when they did that, it's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6 countries. Let me put their names there as well. So it's France, Italy, West Germany, and Belgium, Luxembourg, and Netherlands. Okay, so these ones here. And what they did is they created the European coal and steel community. So it was an economic agreement about coal and steel. And the idea, again, is to stop European wars. So they would trade together as sort of, you know, it's all coming on the back of this World War II. So that's another effort to work together and trade together as a way of preventing war. 1957, the Treaty of Rome. We just see its development and growth over the years. Treaty of Rome, they created the European Economic Community. It's rules about trade, custom duties, having a single market, so working together. 1992 is Maastricht Treaty, and it's about shared citizenship now and shared currency and policies, so it's sort of a bit broader. 1993 is when the name became the European Union. Up until now, it was called those other things like European Coal and Steel Community, European Economic Community, but now it's European Union. That's what the name. Okay, 93. Now 2007, Treaty of Lisbon. And the Treaty of Lisbon, so voting rules, governance structures, consolidation. Basically, they made some amendments to the other treaties. They were trying to really make the structure, strengthen it, and develop like good rules for voting, things like that, how it would work within the European Union. So we see, I haven't added all the countries as they've been added, but by now we have 27 member countries. Today. This is after Brexit. We'll get on to Brexit. Okay, so the EU was created for different reasons, variety of reasons, but one of the reasons, and that's relevant to our point today, again, is this issue over American hegemony in Europe. We have those two models that I spoke about as well. We can also look at it as this model where, I'll make a section somewhere. I'll section up this bit here. If you see the United States, it's made up of all its countries, and the USSR back in the day, it had all its countries. And then we had Europe here. But the idea is if they unite together, they can also be strong, and they wouldn't have to be dominated by either, because they would be able to unite together and be strong without needing one of those others to protect them, or in case they were attacked, I guess they could unite together. So that was the thinking, one of the thinkings behind the European Union, especially as we can see the thinking here, we can see about this desire to have nuclear weapons and to set up their own European structures without America so they can protect themselves. Okay, so what did John F. Kennedy, he's a famous guy, what did he think about the European Union? There's a quote from him as well. If the French and other European powers acquire nuclear weapons, they could be entirely independent and America might be on the outside looking in. So he was not in favour of European integration that left America out. And one of the things, the pressures that was put onto these countries in Europe was that they were not able to produce a whole spectrum of weapons and military equipment. They were kind of pressured, coerced, or whatever the word is, to specialise in certain manufacturing areas so that there wouldn't be a capability for them amongst themselves to actually meet their own needs entirely, if that makes sense. They're sort of given particular areas to specialise in, but they would always then be forced to depend on the United States. The quote there was, the idea was that the European nations would complement the US power, but they wouldn't have the potential to challenge US power. By keeping some things unavailable to them, they wouldn't be able to challenge the United States. So they were kind of held down, restrained in that way, kind of allowed to exist, but not completely without some, they were held down. I don't know what the right word is, put your foot on their neck and prevent them from fully rising up, but just sort of let them be there. The United States did gain some benefits from a European Union setup. So I think they weren't trying to get rid of it altogether, but they just didn't want it to get too strong. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so turning our attention back to prophecy, we understand that the Sunday Law is coming, and we expect American dictatorship inside their own nation has to be overthrown first, and then an international dominance becoming like a unilateral power to gain the ascendancy over all the other nations and force its will upon everyone. So for that to happen, how many superpowers does the USA have to actually take down? We're very familiar with them having to take down Russia, the USSR and Russia, but the other power they had to take down is Europe and the European Union, so that's also no longer a threat at all. So they actually have to destroy the European Union. For the time being, they've probably been just restraining it, but have to destroy it. But when we say the word destroy, in prophetically understanding of destroying the European Union may not mean that it needs to actually completely disappear. So as in, we would see on the news that there is no more European Union. That's not quite what we expect to see, because when the USSR was destroyed, like the countries weren't completely destroyed, but the power of it was destroyed. So what we expect to see is a European Union. Basically 2021, we would expect to see that it's a lot less powerful here. And then maybe something still playing out here until we see Sunday Law, where you really become aware of the losses that have already happened. Okay, so 2021, we had marked as, this period here we marked as a Cold War. I'll just put it back here, a Cold War. And also it's going from like the end of fighting. If we look at that other, it was World War I, the end of fighting. But here is like the realization from here to here. So this is where we're standing today. So if we're seeing things in the news about the European Union, it's in this context, prophetically speaking. It's basically been destroyed, but we have some things still happening today as we sort of see that last few processes playing out. I did look at the news this morning and looked up the European Union, and there's a lot of concern there today because it's they've got this Belgian Prime Minister is the current president of the European Parliament, and he did make a speech. I think it was like his inauguration speech, and he's very concerned for a Trump presidency, because the threats are that United States are threatening to withdraw from NATO. And he's basically saying to Europe, it'll just be us, like we'll be on our own and we need to protect ourselves. But of course, they've been severely weakened over the last however many years that is, that they really wouldn't be able to stand up against a powerful United States today. There's a lot of problems within the European Union itself, trouble on the inside, trouble within each of these nations as far-right parties are rising and nationalistic parties are rising, that basically the war is over, but I don't think they're kind of fully aware yet how bad that is, perhaps. So I still see that happening in the news, happening there in Europe. Okay, so moving on to Steve Bannon. Okay, so somebody
Katherine, just before you go on, correct me if I'm wrong, just a little summary between 21 and current present. So you're saying, because obviously at the beginning of this Western Front, you've got that alliance and the 40-year anniversary between France and Germany, which arguably the two strongest members of the European Union. So presently, because of, I know there's economic issues in Germany at the moment. I know that. So is this, so what you're saying is they've got internal issues, whether it's refugees, whatever it is, you've got the rise of these right-wing or populism is rising, and they're almost so busy fighting inwardly that they're sort of distracted, they're diluted, there's so many things going on that there's just too many fires. Is that sort of why they're becoming weak?
Yes, and also the far-right parties don't like the EU, so they encourage their own countries to maybe they want to change the rules of the EU, or they don't want to obey what the EU says that they have to do. They want to erode the power of EU over their own country. And so I will mention, but there was an act that a lot of far-right parties from 16 of the European Union nations, so 16 nations were represented in this letter to the European Union, and they were basically trying to push back against the European Union. So yes, there's distractions, but there's also active fighting against the European Union as well within the countries. So for politicians that like the European Union, but if a lot of their population don't like the European Union, then there's pressure on them to cater to what those people want, so it's eroding from the inside. It's a bit like when the USSR was taken down. We recall that a lot of that was brought down from the inside. And how do you break something down from the inside? Well, you sow a bunch of ideas and thoughts into it. You put information warfare out there, and the people for themselves within the Europe can bring itself down if you can do that, if you can manipulate them. So that's how I'm sort of seeing it. I'm sure there's probably lots of aspects. Yeah.
Makes perfect sense, because you've got it's the Sunday law. It's the revolution, counter-revolution. It's a global two-sided thing going on, and that just dilutes every country fighting amongst itself. So of course it has to weaken everywhere, every country.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. It's insidious. It gets in there and does its thing, and then people do the work on behalf of yeah. Okay, well, so
Thank
great.
you.
No problem. So when we're talking about information warfare, I was going to just get started on Steve Bannon anyway, and we know that Steve Bannon was closely involved with a lot of that information warfare in 2016. So when we said what happened in 2016 back here, and we mentioned the election of Donald Trump, and I said that there were some other things that happened here. There was something else that happened in 2016 that Steve Bannon was really proud of. Does anybody remember? So he took credit for this as well. He took credit for something else. 2016. Think Europe. Think European Union.
Brexit.
Right. So that's a major waymark there. We've got Brexit as well. So Steve Bannon was not just after overthrowing the political establishment in the United States. He was also very much interested in promoting nationalism in Europe. And he really doesn't like the European Union. So I have an article. I won't share the screen, but I'll read you some of it. This is from 2017, and they're writing this because Donald Trump is now in power, and Steve Bannon was the advisor, a prominent position in the executive branch at the time. And so they were looking into Bannon, what's his philosophy and so forth. They wrote this article in Politico. I think the title was Steve Bannon Wants to Destroy the European Union or something like that. So here's the quote. So in early 2014, so we can mark 2014 here for this event. In early 2014, Bannon launched a London outpost of Breitbart, opening what he called a new front in our current cultural and political war. Bannon hates the EU, says Ben Shapiro, a former Breitbart writer who split with Bannon last year, 2016, but who shares the sentiment. Quoting, this is quoting Shapiro, he figures it's mainly an instrument for globalism as opposed to an instrument for the bettering of Western civilization. The European Union is under serious threat, Guy Verhofstadt. Okay, so this is Guy Verhofstadt. He's saying the European Union is under serious threat. This is a Belgian Prime Minister and now a senior EU official. He told a London audience in late January. Its enemies, he said, now include Trump, thanks in large part to the enormous influence of his chief political advisor, Mr. Bannon. So I probably messed up some of the reading of that. Basically, Steve Bannon hates the EU, and Shapiro is saying from his experience and knowledge of Steve Bannon had set up an outpost of Breitbart, and the article discusses the tactics that outpost of Breitbart was using in the British world to promote nationalism. And the idea is to bring down the European Union. And now the people in the European Union can see that this is a threat, especially if Steve Bannon is now in the ear of Donald Trump. So Bannon's culture war in Europe was to unite nationalist parties, to promote nationalism generally, and the division of European nations. Wikipedia has a page on, it's called The Movement, because Steve Bannon had set up something called The Movement. So I'll read the little description of it. The Movement is a Brussels-based right-wing populist organisation founded by Steve Bannon of the United States to promote right-wing populist and economic nationalist groups in Europe that are opposed to the European Union governments and political structures of Europe. Its express purpose is to oppose the European Union and those political structures in Europe. They want to divide these united European countries into separate pieces. And we all know it's divide and conquer strategy, isn't it? That might not be what he's saying he's doing, but in his mind, he doesn't like this globalism that he sees. And a lot of this then relates to our prophetic issues of equality that's directly related to that. When I read later, we will see some of the issues that these nationalist groups have with the EU, what's actually bothering them. So a couple other points is every time a nationalist party is elected in the European Union, Bannon has weakened it. The EU can stay in its current form as long as it's not a threat to the United States. So it might not actually completely fragment, but it will be weakened. It will have less power. Okay, so something else significant that happened in 2019 was COVID-19. And that was a problem for the EU as well, because there was a lot of conspiracies surrounding COVID-19 and conspiracy thinking type methodology when it comes to structures like the European Union. So it also contributed to the downfall of the European Union's power and strength. So COVID-19 was a big major hit to the European Union. And then I'll take us to 2021, which is where we mark the end. Oops, back up here. 2021 is where we're marking the end of this war. And I'm sure there are many different things that happened in 2021. When I looked up 2021 in the European Union, I found out that the leaders of right-wing parties from 16 EU countries, they signed a document for deep reform of the EU, not disbanding it, but reforming it. And I'll read some quotes. All right, so here's a few quotes from their signed document. Quote one, the cooperation of European nations should be based on tradition, respect for the culture and history of European states, respect for Europe's Judeo-Christian heritage, and the common values that unite our nations, and not on their destruction. Quote two, The use of political structures and the law to create a European superstate and new social structures is a manifestation of the dangerous and invasive social engineering known from the past, which must provoke legitimate resistance. Quote 3. The moralistic overactivity that we have seen in recent years in the EU institutions has resulted in a dangerous tendency to impose an ideological monopoly. And the fourth one mentions the signatories plead for family values as a solution to curbing negative demographic trends. So they're having issues with these ideological pressure and in some cases punishment that is when there are human rights abuses in some European nations. If the EU tries to act on that and sanction a country, these political parties, far-right political parties, feel that that's overly controlling in their thinking. It's like they're calling it an ideological monopoly, and they're destroying traditions by trying to basically essentially protect and improve equality, I think is the underlying issue here. So in 2021, when we get to the end here, two major countries are trying to hold the EU together: Germany and France. Angela Merkel, Emmanuel Macron trying hard to hold it together in 2021. We see those two countries coming up from beginning to end as they're working together in unity to try to be strong for Europe. But we see these factions coming up from the inside here. So, and just a reminder, I guess, this study is just a reminder that the events that are happening in Europe today are prophetic events. We know they're prophetic because they're linked to the war on the Western Front, so they're linked to our historic lines, and so that makes them prophetic subjects. We understand the world is marching towards Sunday law, of course. So it's not just the United States versus Russia, we also have Europe as well in the mix. And that concludes my study for today, and appreciate everybody's contributions and questions. I will pray and then open up for some more questions shortly. So if you'll kneel with me. Saviour God, we ask that you would really put in our hearts a love for equality, a really deep and strong love for equality in all its forms and manifestations, that we may not be caught or taken unawares from some lack of understanding or duty, that we may put our faith into practice, as we were taught earlier this morning. We know that in you, it is you that can change our hearts, and we're all in need of heart changes. And the time is short, dear God. We see things happening in the world around us, huge changes in the world. We just see it, and everybody in the world knows that the world is changing. May you strengthen us and prepare us for the crisis, we pray. Help us to influence those in our spheres of influence for the truth. And may you empower us and give us a vision of hope, that we may not be in despair at these things that we see, but that we would see a further horizon and hold on to that hope that we have in you, that things will be better one day, and that you do have a plan and you will make sure it is completed and a success too. So we pray for all these things, and we thank you for these studies. In Jesus' name, amen.